Welcome back to the OSM channel. Well, I went to start my Ariens Deluxe 30 snowblower this morning and it didn't want to start. I turned on the fuel, I primed the fuel, turned the choke on, brought the throttle up slightly, ensured that the kill switch was on, and I tried quite a few times, probably 20 pulls, choke on and off, thought maybe I flooded it. Well, I didn't get so much as a hiccup out of this engine. So I wheeled the snowblower over to the garage, started doing a little bit more inspecting, and I found a black sticky residue on the frame, where the engine mounts onto the frame. And I've seen that residue before, and that's usually an indication that there is some type of rodent infestation. That's all that fecal matter dripping down, and that's just something you want to look for because that's a good clue that you have some type of rodent issue. So at that point, I removed the shroud off the engine, and I removed the fuel tank, which I'll show you how to do that here shortly. And I found this nest on top of the machine, and that's when I decided to start recording because I felt like this is an issue many people are probably going to have with their snowblowers. So what do we need in order for an engine to run? Well, we need air, and I feel like that is the most likely culprit here. I believe snowblowers do not have air filters, but of course they do have carburetors, and it's very possible that this nest is obstructing the airflow into the carburetor. So I feel like that's our most likely culprit. But we also need spark, we need fuel, and we need compression. Now, when I put this snowblower away, it was running just fine, so I don't anticipate we have any issues with compression. Another likely possibility is one of the wires, either the kill switch or the spark plug wire or a safety kill switch wire. Perhaps one of those wires was chewed. So we're going to have to dig into this and see if we can figure out what our issue is. But the first thing I'm going to do is show you how I remove the shrouds. We'll remove this nest off the machine, try and clean it a little bit, and see if we find any other clues. So now I'm going to walk you through how to gain access to the top of the engine, which is ridiculous because you have to loosen up this to be able to remove this. You got to pull this off, you got to pull this off, two fasteners, you got to remove this panel off just to gain access to the fuel tank. Then there's two fasteners. So let me tell you how to do it. So first we have to start on our heat shroud for the exhaust. Two 10mm fasteners here and here. We have to loosen those up in order to lift this guard, this heat shield, off of this panel. You can leave these two fasteners in. Next thing you need to do, this is your master control lever. It controls choke and throttle. You need to pull this straight up off the shaft. A little bit of firm pressure, it should come off. I'm going to put this off to the side. I believe there's a 10mm fastener right above the primer bulb on the top left and the top right, two 10mm fasteners. Remove those. Now to the right of the kill switch, again, there are two 10mm fasteners that you're going to have to remove right here and here. So once you remove those two fasteners, that will loosen up this panel partially. But now we should be able to lift this panel up out of the way. So we're starting to gain access. Now here is your fuel shutoff valve. You can see the shaft in there. And this is what the knob looks like. And you're going to have to do the same thing with this knob as what you did with the master control lever. So you're going to pull this straight out. So as we move to the right side of the machine, now you need to swap from a 10mm socket to a 12mm socket. So this is your electric starter. To the lower left and the lower right of the electric starter are two 12mm bolts. You have to remove those. Then you should be able to remove this shroud out of the way. Now on the fuel tank, there's going to be two more 12mm fasteners that you have to access. Sorry, the lighting is awful and I ordered a new light for my camera, not in yet. But there's going to be a 12mm fastener right here, and there's going to be one tucked under the tank on the other side. And that one's going to be a bit difficult to access. It's going to sit right in there past the fuel shutoff valve. And in order to access that one, what I recommend, a short 12mm socket, 1/4-inch drive shaft, 6 inches. That should get it out of there. So once you do all of that, you should finally be able to lift the fuel tank up off the motor and see what you're working with. Wonderful engineering. Now let's start removing this nest out of here and see if we find anything obvious, which this is always not a fun job dealing with these nests. Try and keep these boogers out of your machines, but sometimes you got to throw your machine in the shed and just find their way in. If you found a way to prevent infestations such as this nest, please drop a comment and let me know what I need to do in the future. But it's important we remove this, and we're going to vacuum all this stuff out of here because it's really important that the fins on the motor are not obstructed. We need those fins to be open, which allows the motor to cool. So I'm not seeing anything obvious at this point in time, but I'm going to get the shop vac out. We'll start vacuuming this and keep looking here. So upon my initial inspection, I am not seeing anything obvious. Yes, the nest was sitting here. This is the throttle, but I don't believe the nest was obstructing the throttle. I've also looked at the wires pretty carefully and I have not found any chewed or corroded wires. So this is our throttle. And as for our choke is a direct connection into the carburetor. Now our carburetor sits behind this panel, and look at the opening to that carburetor. It's wide open. There is no air filter on this machine. So looking inside that butterfly valve, I looked in there and it looks clean. I don't see any obstructions in there. It is possible that the jets are clogged on the carburetor. So that is a possibility. I'm not ruling that out, but the next thing I want to do is to remove the spark plug, and we will ground the spark plug on the side of the machine, try and turn it over and test and see if we have spark. Okay, so I removed the spark plug, I reinstalled it back into its holder, and I have the spark plug touching this metallic mount. And we've grounded the spark plug out. What we're going to do, we're going to turn the engine over and see if we get any spark here. Do not hold this because you will get a nasty shock. That's a lesson you only have to learn once in life. So I'll turn it over a little bit. And I saw a really good spark there. I don't know if you guys were picking it up on camera. Yeah, we're getting great sparks, so that is not our issue. So we have verified that we have good sparks, so our sparking system is in good shape. Now, if you suspect that you have a compression issue, what you could do now is install your compression testing tool into the spark plug hole, turn the engine over several times, and look at your gauge and see what kind of compression readings you're getting. I'll try and leave some info in the comments section down below as to what the compression of this engine should be. I don't suspect that that is an issue of mine, so I'm going to move forward by reinstalling the spark plug. So now we're going to check to see if we're getting good fuel flow to the carburetor. I've temporarily reinstalled this fuel control knob just to show you that the fuel control lever is in the open position. So now to check fuel flow, we have two options. One, we could remove the fuel line going into the carburetor, see if we're getting good fuel flow out of that line, or I'm going to try something different today. So this is the bowl for the carburetor. This bolt on the side of the bottom is a drain bolt, but I think we can also use this to test for flow. Now, how a typical carburetor works is there's a float in here with a needle on top of that float. Now, as this carburetor uses that fuel in the engine, the fuel in the bowl lowers, and that float inside the bowl lowers, lowering that needle, thus allowing fuel to enter the bowl. So my theory is if we remove this drain bolt off the bowl, we should be able to see if we're getting decent flow into the bowl of the carburetor. You don't want to remove this one with your fuel supply valve on, because this will drop the whole bottom of the bowl of the carburetor out and you're going to be dealing with a little bit of a mess. So we're going to loosen this side bolt up, a little catch cup, and I'll pop this out of here maybe for 30-40 seconds. We'll see if we get good fuel flow out of here. That's not great. So right now it looks like we have a fuel supply issue. Wonder if that needle's stuck. You see what happens if I press the fuel primer. It doesn't sound like it's priming properly. Yeah, I think we have some type of fuel supply issue. So let's see if we're getting good fuel flow from the fuel tank into the carburetor. So I'm going to shut off the fuel supply at this valve going down to the carburetor. Next, I'm going to remove the connection where the fuel line attaches to the carburetor. So we have this clamp. Got to carefully work this hose off. I'm going to turn on this fuel supply valve. We'll see if we get any kind of flow, which we're not. Interesting. Now just to show you, we do have fuel in the tank, and I never removed that filter screen, so I don't know if we have some type of gelling condition or something that's just clogging up this valve. It's also possible that we have a bad valve here. So what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to hook up my air hose to the end of this fuel supply line, and we'll back blow it into the tank, open up this valve, and see if we get good flow. We'll insert this into the fuel supply line, open up this valve. And I think we're going to be getting good flow now. It's blowing a little bit of fuel at the top of the cap. Let's try and flow into this cup now. See if we get anything. Well, it's not high flow, but I'll take it. That should do it. That's odd. Maybe I'll blow it out one more time. Connect it back to the carburetor. Alright, so let's turn the fuel on. I'm going to temporarily reinstall this panel, try and start it. Put this control lever back on. So our fuel is on, let's prime this. Definitely sounding a bit gurgly now, which is good. Now everything is kind of in its position, but nothing's fastened down. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and start the machine, but as soon as it starts and it sounds okay, I'm going to shut it off quick to avoid rattling anything into oblivion. So we want our choke to start. So that's the red knob all the way to the right. Our throttle, I'm going to twist it to the right a little bit. There should be a sticker. So back, counterclockwise is low throttle, clockwise is high throttle, so we're going to go a little bit past low throttle. Our key is in the on position. That's off, that's on, our fuel's on, we're primed. I do have the extension cord plugged in, so I'm going to bump the starter and we'll see if we get her to fire. Well, she's running pretty good right now. That was an odd one. I'd never had a fuel valve get kind of clogged up like that. That was an odd one. You know, normally when I have a starting issue, it's generally a carburetor issue, but in this case, it was a fuel supply issue, and I think something got gummed up inside this fuel supply valve, which on a lot of engines inside the tank, there's a screen on the siphon tube. But with this, you know, you have that screen right where the fill is. I do treat my gasoline with Stable, and at the end of the season, I do run the carburetor dry. So I don't know, that was a weird one, but she sounds good now. So now we need to bolt the fuel tank back onto the top of the engine, and I do want to show you in terms of the 12mm bolts, there are two different sizes. There are two shorter ones, and there are two longer ones. The two longer ones are the ones that are hidden underneath the fuel tank. The two shorter ones are going to fasten the fuel tank shroud, specifically by the starter plug-in. So I'm going to put these off to the side for now. So how this is going to go, you see you have your hole right here. Well, on the tank, there's a threaded nut, I guess, welded into that tank mount. So we're going to line this up, shimmy it down a little bit. There we go. So we're on the other side of the fuel tank, and you can kind of make out where this other bolt goes. This one's definitely difficult to access. You know, really the best thing to do would be to take this fastener off, lower that fuel control valve. Maybe I'll do that. I think that's probably going to be an 8 mil. Yeah, that's the ticket. I should have done that from the start. Yeah, with that out of the way, we have much better access to that bolt. Next, we need to reinstall this side shroud, which the key things you're looking for, you're looking to line up the fuel control valve shaft and your two 12mm fasteners that are going to clamp everything down, lower left of the starter plug-in and the lower right. So we'll start these by hand and crank them down. So before I button up this carburetor, let's talk about what happens if you have good fuel flow going to the carburetor. Well, let's recap. We've identified that we have good spark. We don't have an issue with our spark system. We have good fuel between the fuel tank to the carburetor. We've identified that the fuel is still fresh enough as to where this engine should run. You know, if the fuel's a couple years old, that just might be your issue. But if you have good fuel going to the carburetor, you might have a compression issue, which could indicate that you have an issue with your piston rings, perhaps a timing issue, perhaps sticky or bent or damaged valves. So a compression test is a good way to kind of determine if you have some type of internal issue you need to start looking at. But more often than none, you will have a clogged up carburetor. And with today's modern ethanol fuel, the ethanol just destroys these carburetors if you allow it to sit for a long time. It condensates. The ethanol also damages the seals and internal diaphragms. Personally, I've never had any luck cleaning out the internals of a carburetor. Here's what I recommend. If you have good fuel flow to the carburetor, you got good spark, you think you have good compression, I'd recommend just replacing that carburetor with a cheap one you get on Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description down below to one I found for my machine. But I've had really good luck with the cheap replacement carburetors. They're normally set properly, and in order to replace the carburetor from here on out, it doesn't look bad at all. On the left side of the carburetor, you have your primer bulb connection. On the right side, you have your fuel supply connection. Now, what holds the carburetor onto the engine are these two nuts. Looks like you have a bracket here and here. That should come right off, and that should pull right off. It shouldn't be a big deal at all to swap out that carburetor. So I just wanted to point that out before we finish putting this panel back on, because that is definitely an issue that many people are going to have, and I recommend those cheap Amazon carburetors. I've had really good luck with them. So with that out of the way, we can finish reinstalling this panel, and then ultimately we have to connect this to that heat shroud. So I start from the top. You know, there's a hole in the panel up here for the master control lever. Let me reposition the camera and show you what we got to get lined up on the side there. Okay, so what we have to do now is this decal, we have to peel it back, and there's no lip. We're just going to lap this panel over the previous shroud we installed, and we just got to line up the holes in this panel with the holes in the casting for the bolts. And we are swapping over to the 8mm bolts. Now, you're going to have longer 8mm bolts and shorter 8mm bolts. You're going to use the longer 8mm bolts here, and the shorter ones are going to go by the primer bulb. Longer 8mm bolts started. Shorter 8mm bolts again are going to go right above the primer bulb. Next, we need to tighten up the 8mm bolts that clamp this heat shield onto this panel that we just reinstalled. Next, let's reinstall our master control lever, starting with the gray piece. But then we will install our red choke lever, and you just got to push down. That's run. Choke, start. And just about finally, our fuel control lever, which is currently in the on position. Also reinstall the key. That is start, and that is off. On, off.